Smith's discovery causes a sensation. Newspapers report it. The Prime Minister attends the public lecture where Smith presents his findings. The Daily Telegraph funds an expedition to Nineveh specifically to search for more fragments of the Flood Tablet, pieces that might complete the broken narrative. Smith travels to Nineveh, where he spends months sifting through the debris of Ashurbanipal's library. And incredibly, impossibly, he finds the missing fragment, the one piece that completes a crucial section of the text. The odds against such a discovery are astronomical, yet it happens. More tablets are excavated, more texts are translated, and gradually a picture emerges of Mesopotamian religion and mythology. The Sumerians and their successors believed in a vast pantheon of gods, hundreds of divine beings organized in complex hierarchies. At the top were the great gods, the ones the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. Scholars compile lists of these deities, attempting to understand their relationships and functions. Anu, the sky god, father of gods. Enlil, lord of wind and storm. Executor of divine decrees. Enki, or Ea, god of wisdom and the sweet waters below earth. Inanna, or Ishtar, goddess of love and war. Utu, or Shamash, the sun god who sees all and judges with justice. Nanna, or Sin, the moon god. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, and dozens more, each with specific roles, specific cult centers, specific mythological narratives. The term Anunnaki itself becomes a subject of scholarly debate. It seems to mean those of royal blood, or those who came from heaven to earth, depending on how one interprets the Sumerian etymology. The Anunnaki appear to be a collective term for the great gods, as opposed to lesser divine beings. In some texts, the Anunnaki are judges of the underworld, determining the fates of the dead. In others, they are the gods who decreed destiny for humanity at creation. In still others, they are simply the great gods in general, the pantheon's upper tier. The Flood story is found in multiple versions. The oldest, from the Sumerian period, features a king named Ziusudra. Later Akkadian and Babylonian versions name him Atrahasis or Utnapishtim. But the essential narrative remains consistent. Humanity has become too numerous and too noisy. The gods, disturbed by the racket, decide to destroy humanity through flood. But one god, typically Enki, takes pity and warns a faithful human, instructing him to build a boat and preserve life. The flood comes, lasting for days. The gods themselves are terrified by its ferocity, cowering like dogs. When the waters recede and the survivor offers sacrifice, the gods smell the pleasing aroma and gather around like flies, grateful that humans survived to feed them. This detail fascinates modern readers. The gods need humans. They are not omnipotent or self-sufficient. They require worship, offerings, service. When humanity nearly perishes, the gods panic, realizing they have endangered their own comfort. This is a very different conception of divinity than what develops in later monotheistic traditions. As more tablets are translated, more stories emerge. The creation of humanity from clay and divine blood. The descent of Inanna into the underworld. The contest between summer and winter, personified as gods. The building of the city of Babylon and its great ziggurat. The love story of Dumuzi and Inanna. The marriage of the moon god. Countless hymns praising individual deities. And running through all of it, the presence of the Anunnaki. Sometimes named individually, sometimes referenced collectively. Always powerful. Always worthy of respect and fear. Always fundamentally intertwined with human existence. Archaeologists continue excavating Mesopotamian sites. More cities are uncovered. Ur, with its royal tombs containing elaborate grave goods and evidence of human sacrifice. Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh, with its massive temple precincts. Lagash, Nippur, Babylon itself. Each excavation produces more tablets, more texts, more evidence of this complex, sophisticated civilization that flourished thousands of years before classical Greece and Rome. Scholars develop new techniques for dating and analyzing the materials. Stratigraphy allows them to establish which layers are older, which more recent. Pottery styles help date sites. Seal impressions can sometimes identify specific rulers or time periods. Carbon dating, developed in the mid-20th century, provides absolute chronologies, though with significant margins of error for such ancient materials. The picture that emerges is of a civilization that invented writing, mathematics, astronomy, law codes, urban planning, monumental architecture, and complex literature. And at the foundation of all of it, the belief in the Anunnaki, the gods who came from heaven, who created humanity, who taught the arts of civilization. Now we must shift perspective again, moving from the early archaeologists to the interpreters who followed, the scholars who attempted to understand what these ancient texts meant, both to their original authors and to modern readers. The year is 1914. A German scholar named Hermann Gunkel publishes a groundbreaking study examining the relationship between Mesopotamian myths and biblical narratives. He argues that many stories in Genesis, particularly the early chapters dealing with creation and the flood, are Hebrew adaptations of older Mesopotamian traditions. The idea is controversial, but increasingly accepted as the evidence accumulates. This raises profound questions for religious communities. If the flood story is not unique to the Bible, but borrowed from earlier pagan sources, what does that mean for biblical authority? If creation narratives have Mesopotamian precedents, how should that inform interpretation? These questions generate heated debate in both scholarly and religious circles. Other scholars focus on reconstructing Mesopotamian religion as a system. They analyze the architectural layouts of temples, the schedules of festivals and rituals, the roles of different classes of priests, the methods of divination and prophecy. They attempt to understand how ancient Mesopotamians experienced their religion, what they believed, how they conceptualized the relationship between gods and humans. Thorkild Jacobsen, a Danish scholar working primarily in the mid-20th century, proposes that Mesopotamian religion evolved through distinct phases. The earliest phase, in the 4th millennium, saw gods as providers, cosmic forces that supplied human needs. The 3rd millennium brought gods as rulers, divine kings who governed the cosmos. The second millennium emphasized gods as parents, nurturing but demanding. Each phase reflected the changing social and political structures of human society, with people projecting their understanding of authority and relationship onto the divine realm. This interpretive approach, understanding gods as reflections of human social organization, becomes influential. It allows scholars to make sense of otherwise puzzling details in the myths. Why do the gods hold assemblies and debate decisions? Because Mesopotamian city-states govern through councils of elders. Why do gods have specific jobs and responsibilities? Because Mesopotamian society was highly organized around specialized labor. Why do gods need food and housing? Because Mesopotamian temples functioned as households, with the god as the estate owner. Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the great Sumerologists of the 20th century, spends decades translating Sumerian literary texts. His work makes accessible hundreds of poems, hymns, and narratives previously known only to specialists. He popularizes Sumerian culture, writing books for general audiences that explain what the world's first civilization believed and achieved. Kramer identifies numerous firsts in Sumerian culture. The first schools where scribes learned their craft. The first legal precedents establishing principles of justice. The first pharmacopoeia listing medicines and treatments. The first bicameral congress with an upper and lower assembly. The first literary debates presenting two sides of questions. The first proverbs and wisdom literature. And underlying all of it, the first theology, the systematic attempt to understand divine nature and divine will. The Anunnaki in Kramer's presentation are the pantheon's aristocracy. They are the decision-makers, the fate decreers, the gods who matter most in cosmic governance. Below them are the Igigi, lesser gods who perform labor, and below the Igigi are humans, created specifically to take over the work that even the lesser gods found burdensome. This hierarchy is explicit in multiple texts. The Atrahasis epic, one of the most important Mesopotamian compositions, centers on this theme. It begins with the Igigi gods digging canals and watercourses, maintaining the rivers, doing the hard physical labor required to sustain the cosmos. They toil for thousands of years, growing increasingly resentful. Finally, they rebel, marching on Enlil's palace, surrounding it, threatening violence. The great Anunnaki convene an emergency council. Enlil is prepared to use force against the rebels, but Enki proposes a creative alternative: create a new being to do the work. Thus humanity is formed, literally as a solution to a labor shortage. We are, according to this text, designed and created to be workers, to free the gods from toil. This creation story has remarkable implications. Humans have inherent purpose. Work is not punishment for sin, but the very reason for human existence. The relationship between humans and gods is essentially economic. Humans provide labor and worship. Gods provide protection and the conditions for survival. Some modern readers find this narrative troubling or demeaning, but ancient Mesopotamians apparently found it meaningful and satisfying. It explained their place in the cosmos. It gave divine sanction to the social order. It made sense of why life involved so much hard work. As the 20th century progresses, more sites are excavated, more tablets translated, more evidence accumulated. The pace of discovery accelerates. Archaeologists develop more refined techniques. Computer databases allow easier comparison of texts. Collaborative international projects pool resources and expertise. But then, political instability in Iraq and Syria complicates archaeological work. The Gulf War in 1991 disrupts research. The Iraq War beginning in 2003 is catastrophic for archaeological sites and museums. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad is looted, with thousands of artifacts stolen or destroyed. Archaeological sites are bulldozed, ransacked by looters seeking objects to sell on the black market. Entire tales, unexcavated mounds containing millennia of human history, are destroyed. The loss is incalculable. How many tablets were destroyed? How many artifacts that might have revolutionized understanding are gone forever? Scholars can only guess and mourn, yet work continues where possible. In safer regions, excavations proceed. Museums holding Mesopotamian collections continue research. Scholars still publish new translations, new interpretations, new theories. And then, beginning in the 1970s, a very different kind of interpretation emerges. A Swiss author named Erich von Däniken publishes books proposing that ancient myths, including those of the Anunnaki, are actually accounts of contact with extraterrestrial beings. He argues that the gods who came from heaven were literally alien visitors, that their advanced technology was misunderstood as divine power by primitive humans. Von Däniken's books become bestsellers, appealing to readers fascinated by the possibility of ancient astronauts. He points to various ancient artifacts and monuments, arguing they show evidence of advanced technology. The precision of Egyptian pyramids, the massive stones of Baalbek, the Nazca lines in Peru, and in Mesopotamia, the descriptions of gods descending from the sky, the Anunnaki who came from above, the celestial vehicles mentioned in texts. Mainstream scholars dismiss these theories as pseudoscience, pointing out that von Däniken cherry-picks evidence, mistranslates texts, and ignores context. The Anunnaki myths, they argue, make perfect sense within the framework of ancient Near Eastern religion. There is no need to invoke space aliens to explain them. But the idea captures popular imagination. Zecharia Sitchin, another alternative theorist, builds on von Däniken's work, proposing elaborate scenarios involving a supposed 12th planet called Nibiru, whose inhabitants, the Anunnaki, came to Earth to mine gold. He claims humans were genetically engineered as a slave race to work in these mines. Sitchin's books also become bestsellers, particularly among New Age audiences. He presents himself as a scholar, claiming expertise in ancient languages. But academic Assyriologists point out that his translations are wildly inaccurate, that he makes elementary errors in reading cuneiform, that his astronomical theories contradict established physics. Michael Heiser, a scholar with actual expertise in biblical Hebrew and ancient Near Eastern languages, writes detailed critiques of Sitchin's work, demonstrating error after error. Heiser shows that Sitchin misreads words, invents meanings, ignores grammar, and constructs arguments that cannot be supported by the actual texts. Yet the alternative interpretations persist in popular culture. Documentaries propose ancient alien theories. Websites elaborate on supposed Anunnaki connections to modern events. The Internet age allows these ideas to spread rapidly, often without critical examination. Meanwhile, serious scholarship continues. New translations of Anunnaki texts appear, each attempting greater accuracy. Scholars debate fine points of interpretation, the meaning of specific terms, the relationship between different versions of myths, the historical development of theological concepts. The Anunnaki remain enigmatic. Were they originally specific name gods, who later became a collective term? Or was the term always collective? Different texts seem to use it differently. In some, the Anunnaki are clearly the great gods. In others, they seem to be underworld deities. In still others, the term is almost synonymous with gods in general. Context matters immensely. A word in a Sumerian text from 2500 BCE might have a different nuance than the same word in a Babylonian text from 1700 BCE. Languages evolve. Religious concepts develop and change. What began in Sumerian culture was adopted and adapted by Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, each adding their own emphases, their own interpretations. The peaceful afternoon in a modern university library finds scholars still working on these questions. They sit surrounded by reference works, dictionaries of Sumerian and Akkadian, sign lists, grammar guides. They examine photographs of tablets, studying the cuneiform impressions, debating how to read damaged or ambiguous signs. This is painstaking work, requiring years of training and immense patience. Each text must be carefully transliterated from cuneiform into Roman characters, then translated into modern language, then interpreted in cultural and historical context. Footnotes multiply as scholars explain choices, justify readings, acknowledge ambiguities, and alternative possibilities. The general public rarely sees this detailed work. They encounter the myths in popular books or documentaries, often simplified or sensationalized. The careful hedging of academic translations, the acknowledgement of uncertainty, the technical precision, all this is stripped away in favor of dramatic narratives. But the scholars persist, driven by genuine curiosity about the past, by the desire to understand humanity's earliest civilizations, by the conviction that these ancient texts have something meaningful to tell us about how humans have understood their place in the cosmos. Evening comes to the library. Lights flicker on automatically as daylight fades. The scholar at the desk stretches, rubs tired eyes, makes a note for tomorrow's work. The tablets, photographed and preserved, hold their secret still, waiting for patient interpretation. Somewhere in Iraq, in the troubled land between the rivers, ancient mounds still rise from the landscape. Some have been excavated, their treasures removed to museums. Others remain untouched, holding who knows what texts, what artifacts, what insights into the world of the Anunnaki. The story continues unfinished. Each generation of scholars brings new questions, new methods, new perspectives. The Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, remain subjects of fascination and debate. their true nature perhaps forever partially obscured by the millennia that separate us from the people who first wrote their names in clay. The sun sets over the modern city of Baghdad, casting long shadows across the Tigris River, the same river that flowed past ancient Babylon, that sustained Assyrian armies, that witnessed the very birth of civilization. Its waters move slowly southward, as they have for millennia, carrying silt and memory toward the Persian Gulf. In museums around the world, the tablets rest in climate-controlled cases. The British Museum in London, the Louvre in Paris, the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, the Oriental Institute in Chicago, the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Each institution holds fragments of the Mesopotamian past, pieces of the great puzzle that was Sumerian and Babylonian civilization. A visitor stands before a display case in the British Museum, looking at a small clay tablet no larger than a smartphone. The surface is covered with tiny cuneiform impressions, each wedge carefully pressed into the clay 4,000 years ago. The label identifies it as a school text, a student's practice tablet from the city of Nippur. The student copied out a hymn to Enlil, making several errors that the teacher corrected. This mundane object, this homework assignment from the distant past, connects us directly to another human being across an almost unimaginable gulf of time. A young person, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, sitting in a scribal school, struggling to master the complex cuneiform script, copying religious texts as part of their education. That student lived and died thousands of years ago, their name unknown, their life unrecorded except for this one clay tablet that happened to survive. What did that student believe about the Anunnaki? The question is unanswerable with certainty, yet we can make educated guesses. The student was being trained for the priesthood or for temple administration, learning the sacred texts, internalizing the worldview they expressed. The student almost certainly accepted the reality of the gods as unquestioningly as a medieval European accepted the reality of the Christian God, or as a modern person accepts the reality of gravity. The gods were simply there, part of the fabric of existence, as real as the sun and moon, as undeniable as the need for food and water. The Anunnaki had created humanity, taught civilization, established the proper order of society. To honor them through offerings and rituals was not superstition, but practical necessity, maintaining the cosmic balance that allowed life to continue. Smith's discovery causes a sensation. Newspapers report it. The Prime Minister attends the public lecture where Smith presents his findings. The Daily Telegraph funds an expedition to Nineveh, specifically to search for more fragments of the flood tablet, pieces that might complete the broken narrative. Move now to a different museum, a different artifact. The Louvre holds the Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest comprehensive legal codes, carved onto a black stone stele in the 18th century BCE. At the top of the stele is a relief showing King Hammurabi receiving the laws from the sun god Shamash, one of the Anunnaki. The image makes explicit the source of royal authority and legal legitimacy. The king rules not by his own power, but as the agent of the gods. The laws are not human inventions, but divine revelations. This concept of law as divine gift echoes through subsequent civilizations. Moses receiving the Ten Commandments from Yahweh. Muhammad receiving the Quran from Allah through the angel Gabriel. The Roman concept of natural law reflecting divine reason. The Mesopotamian precedent establishes a pattern that continues for millennia. The laws themselves reveal much about Babylonian society. They address property rights, commercial disputes, marriage and divorce, inheritance, assault and injury, professional negligence. They establish different penalties depending on social class, acknowledging a hierarchical society where the life of an aristocrat is worth more than the life of a commoner, and both worth more than a slave. Modern readers often find these laws harsh. The famous principle of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, seems barbaric. But in historical context, these laws represented progress, an attempt to establish proportional justice, to prevent feuds from escalating beyond the original injury. They created predictability and consistency in legal proceedings, limiting arbitrary punishment. And they were sanctioned by the Anunnaki, given divine authority, made sacred. Breaking the law was not merely a civil offense, but a religious transgression, an offense against the cosmic order. This fusion of religion and law, of divine and civic authority, characterizes Mesopotamian civilization. The temple and the palace were closely intertwined, often managed by the same people or families. The king was frequently described as the god's shepherd, tasked with caring for humanity on behalf of the divine owners. But this raises questions about how belief changes over time. The student copying hymns in ancient Nippur lived in a world where the Anunnaki were unquestioned reality. Yet within a few thousand years, those same gods would be forgotten, their temples abandoned, their very names lost to memory. How does this happen? How do gods die? The process is gradual, complex, involving conquest, cultural change, religious innovation. When Alexander the Great conquered Mesopotamia, he brought Greek culture and Greek gods. When the Seleucids ruled, they promoted Hellenistic culture. When the Parthians and Sassanids held power, they supported Zoroastrianism. When Islam arrived in the 7th century CE, it swept away the last remnants of ancient polytheism. Each transition involved violence, coercion, but also genuine conversion. People adopted new religions for various reasons. Some were convinced by the new theological arguments. Some sought advantage, aligning with the religion of the powerful. Some simply followed their communities, conforming to changing norms. The Anunnaki did not vanish immediately. They faded slowly, their worship declining, their myths reinterpreted or forgotten. The last cuneiform tablets were written in the 1st century CE, more than 3,000 years after the script was invented. The last people who could read the ancient texts, the last who remembered the old prayers, died without passing on their knowledge. And for more than 1,000 years, the Anunnaki ceased to exist, even as subjects of study or speculation. Yet they left traces. Biblical scholars have long recognized that Genesis contains echoes of Mesopotamian myth. The Garden of Eden may reflect Sumerian stories of Dilmun, a paradise island where there was no sickness or death. The Tower of Babel clearly references Mesopotamian ziggurats, the temple towers that dominated urban landscapes. The flood story, as we have seen, is directly borrowed from Mesopotamian sources. Even the biblical god shows traces of Anunnaki characteristics. Yahweh walks in the garden in the cool of the day, like a Mesopotamian god inspecting his estate. He shapes the first human from clay, just as Enki did. He destroys humanity through flood, then regrets it and promises never to do so again, echoing the divine response in the Mesopotamian flood story. These parallels troubled early biblical scholars, who wanted to maintain the uniqueness and originality of Hebrew scripture. But the evidence became overwhelming. The Old Testament did not emerge in isolation, but developed in constant dialogue with surrounding cultures, borrowing, adapting, transforming elements from Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Canaanite traditions. This does not diminish the Bible's significance or value. It simply places it in historical context, acknowledging the reality of cultural exchange and influence. The biblical authors took existing materials and reshaped them for their own purposes, creating something new while building on ancient foundations. The Anunnaki, then, have a legacy far beyond Mesopotamia. Their myths influenced Judaism, which in turn shaped Christianity and Islam. Billions of people today believe variations of stories that began in ancient Sumer, though few recognize the connection. But the legacy extends beyond religious narratives. The concept of divine kingship, of rulers governing by divine right, echoes Mesopotamian precedents. The idea of law as sacred, reflecting divine will, has Mesopotamian roots. The organization of society in hierarchical structures, with clear ranks and roles, mirrors the divine hierarchy of the Anunnaki. Even more fundamentally, the Mesopotamians pioneered the idea of studying the cosmos to understand divine will. They developed astronomy and astrology, observing celestial patterns, correlating them with earthly events, attempting to read the intentions of the gods in the movements of planets and stars. This impulse to find meaning in nature, to discern divine messages in natural phenomena, continues in various forms. Modern scientists reject astrology as pseudoscience. But the astronomical observations the Mesopotamians made were genuine and impressive. They tracked Venus's movements with remarkable accuracy. They predicted lunar eclipses. They developed sophisticated mathematical models of celestial mechanics. This observational discipline, this careful recording of data over generations, this attempt to find patterns and predict future events, anticipates the scientific method itself. The Anunnaki myths also grapple with profound existential questions that remain relevant. Why do humans exist? What is our purpose? Why is life filled with suffering and toil? What happens after death? How should we relate to powers greater than ourselves? The Mesopotamian answers to these questions differ from later religious answers. Humans were created to serve, not to achieve salvation. Work is inherent purpose, not punishment for sin. Death is inevitable and final for mortals, with the underworld a dreary place of shadow and dust, not a realm of reward or punishment. The gods are powerful, but neither omnipotent nor perfectly good, subject to their own limitations and conflicts. These answers may seem pessimistic to modern ears, yet they allowed the Mesopotamians to build sophisticated civilizations that endured for millennia. They found meaning in their work, value in their service to the gods, purpose in maintaining cosmic order. They created great art, literature, architecture, law. They lived, loved, raised families, found joy despite their theology's limitations. Perhaps there is something to learn from this. That meaning can be found in various frameworks, that humans can thrive under different belief systems, that the questions matter more than the specific answers, the seeking more than the finding. The evening deepens outside the museum. Visitors filter out slowly, heading home to their own lives, their own concerns. The tablets remain in their cases, silent witnesses to vanished worlds. The cuneiform signs wait patiently for the scholars who will return tomorrow, continuing the work of interpretation and understanding. In Iraq, night falls over the ancient mounds. Some have been excavated, their secrets partially revealed. Others remain untouched, waiting for more peaceful times when archaeologists can work without fear. The earth holds countless tablets still, stories yet untold, myths yet undiscovered. Who knows what might yet be found? Perhaps versions of myths we thought we understood completely. Perhaps entirely new stories, featuring gods not yet encountered in surviving texts. Perhaps evidence that will revolutionize our understanding of Mesopotamian religion and society. The possibility remains open. History is not a closed book, but an ongoing investigation. Each generation brings new questions, new technologies, new interpretive frameworks. The Anunnaki are not static ancient gods, but subjects of continual reinterpretation, their significance shifting with each age that examines them. In the modern world, some seek to revive ancient Mesopotamian religion. Small groups gather to perform reconstructed rituals, to honor the old gods, to continue traditions broken centuries ago. These modern practitioners face obvious challenges. The ancient languages are dead. The ritual details are often unclear. The cultural context cannot be recovered. What they create is necessarily a modern invention, an imagined version of ancient practice rather than authentic continuity. Yet their efforts reflect something genuine, a hunger for connection with the deep past, for spiritual traditions rooted in history rather than modern invention. They seek in the Anunnaki something that contemporary religion fails to provide, whether that is polytheistic flexibility, mythological richness, or simply difference from dominant traditions. Others engage with the Anunnaki through creative works. Science fiction writers reimagine them as ancient astronauts. Fantasy authors borrow their names and characteristics for fictional pantheons. Video games feature them as characters or plot elements. The Anunnaki have entered pop culture, transformed beyond anything ancient Mesopotamians would recognize, yet carrying forward some trace of the original mysteries. And still the scholars work, translating tablets, publishing papers, refining understanding. They do not seek to revive ancient religion or to sensationalize ancient texts. They simply want to understand what the Mesopotamians believed, why they believed it, how their beliefs functioned in their society. This work proceeds slowly, carefully, without drama. A new translation of an obscure hymn receives a few dozen readers, all specialists in the field. A dissertation on divine epithets in the Ur III period sits in a university library, consulted perhaps once every few years. A journal article clarifying the meaning of a rare Sumerian term generates no headlines, but increments human knowledge fractionally forward. This is how scholarship actually works, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through patient accumulation of small insights, gradual refinement of understanding. It lacks the excitement of discovering a lost civilization or deciphering a mysterious script, but it honors the past through rigorous attention, through commitment to accuracy, through respect for complexity and ambiguity. The night is fully dark now. In homes around the world, people prepare for sleep. Some pray to gods, others to no one. Some follow ancient religions, others modern innovations. Some believe in life after death, others in final extinction. The diversity of human belief remains as rich now as when the Anunnaki were living gods in Mesopotamian minds. Perhaps that is the final legacy, the recognition that humans have always sought to understand their place in the cosmos, have always created stories and systems to make sense of existence. The Anunnaki represent one such attempt, neither more nor less valid than others, shaped by particular historical and cultural circumstances, meeting particular needs. The myths spoke truth, not in literal accuracy, but in meaningful pattern. They explained why the world is as it is, why humans must work, why suffering exists, why death is inevitable. They provided framework for ethics, justification for social structure, connection between individual and cosmos. They worked for the people who believed them, allowing those people to live meaningful lives. And now, thousands of years later, we examine these myths from the outside, no longer believers, but students. We cannot recapture the lived experience of ancient Mesopotamian religion. We can only approximate it through disciplined imagination, informed by texts and artifacts, but necessarily incomplete. Yet in studying the Anunnaki, we learn something about ourselves, about human creativity in constructing meaning, about the persistence of fundamental questions across cultures and centuries, about the ways belief shapes society and society shapes belief, about how gods reflect the concerns and structures of their worshippers. The Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, remain mysterious despite all our study. We know their names, their attributes, their mythological deeds. We have their temples' ruins, their sacred texts preserved in clay. We can trace their influence through subsequent traditions, but we cannot fully understand what they meant to the people who bowed before their statues, who sang their hymns, who shaped their entire lives around service to these divine beings. Perhaps that is appropriate. The past should maintain some mystery, some resistance to complete understanding. It reminds us of our limitations, of the vast differences between ancient and modern worldviews, of the complexity of human experience across time. As sleep approaches, let your mind drift back one final time to ancient Sumer. The same stars that wheel overhead tonight shone on those first cities. The same moon that illuminates the modern world watched over Eridu and Uruk. The same rivers flow, though their courses have shifted, and the civilizations they sustained are dust. Imagine the priest in his temple, performing the evening ritual, feeding the god, singing the hymn, maintaining the sacred order. He believes absolutely in what he does. The god is real, present, listening. The ritual matters, keeps the universe functioning properly. His work has cosmic significance. He finishes his duties and retires to his chamber. He lies on his bed, a simple frame with woven reeds, covered with a woven blanket. The oil lamp burns low. Through the window, stars are visible, the same constellations his people have watched and named and mapped. He closes his eyes, secure in his place in the cosmos. He serves the gods who created him for this purpose. He honors the Anunnaki who maintain the world. He fulfills his function in the great divine plan. And in that certainty, that sense of belonging and purpose, he finds peace. His breathing slows, deepens, sleep comes gently. He dreams perhaps of the gods, of Enki in his water palace, of Inanna in her heaven, of the great assembly where fates are decreed. He dreams the myths he has memorized, the stories that shape his understanding of everything. Tomorrow he will wake and perform the morning ritual. He will feed the god again, sing again, maintain the temple and its operations. The seasons will turn, the rivers will flood and recede. Crops will be planted and harvested. Life will continue its eternal patterns. He does not know, cannot know, that his civilization will end, that his gods will be forgotten, that his tablets will be buried under millennia of sand and silence, that people in an unimaginable future will excavate those tablets, decipher his language, read his sacred texts with scholarly detachment rather than religious devotion. He sleeps in innocent certainty, and perhaps that is blessing rather than curse. To live fully in one's time, accepting its truths, finding meaning in its structures, serving its purposes, creating its beauty. To not know the end, the collapse, the forgetting, to simply be present and committed within the world one knows. And so we leave him sleeping in his ancient night. The Anunnaki watch over him, or so he believes, and that belief is enough. The stars turn, the river flows, the city rests, and across the vast gulf of time, we contemplate these mysteries, these echoes of vanished faith, these voices speaking from clay, telling of gods who came from heaven to shape human destiny. Sleep well, ancient priest, sleep well, student copying homework. Sleep well, farmer and weaver and potter and king. Sleep well, all you countless forgotten people who lived and died believing in the Anunnaki, finding in those gods meaning sufficient for your lives. And sleep well, modern reader, contemplating these ancient stories from the comfort of your own bed, in your own time, with your own beliefs or doubts. The questions persist, the seeking continues, the mystery endures. The Anunnaki fade into the darkness of the past, neither completely known nor entirely lost, hovering at the edges of memory and imagination, reminding us that humanity has always looked upward, wondering what lies beyond, seeking in the heavens explanation for earth, finding in stories of gods who descended from above some answer to the eternal question of why we are here. Rest now. Let the ancient voices fade to whispers. Let the weight of millennia settle like a soft blanket. Let the mysteries of the Anunnaki drift into dreams, where they belong, where they live, still in the deep places of human consciousness. The archetypal stories of gods and creation and purpose and meaning that we tell and retell in endless variation, seeking always to understand our place in the vast cosmos. The stars shine on, the rivers flow, the earth turns, and somewhere in the ruins of Mesopotamia, clay tablets wait in darkness, holding stories 4,000 years old, stories that began in firelight and stylus pressed to wet clay, stories preserved through catastrophe and conquest, through forgetting and rediscovery, speaking still to those patient enough to listen, quiet enough to hear the whispers of those who came before, who built cities in the desert, who invented writing to preserve their myths, who looked to the heavens and imagined gods descending. The Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, bringing civilization, demanding service, shaping human destiny in ways that echo still through all the centuries that followed. Sleep. Dream of ancient temples and forgotten gods. Dream of priests and scribes, of cuneiform pressed into clay, of ziggurats rising toward heaven, of the great assembly where the Anunnaki decreed the fates. Dream of a time when gods walked the earth, when heaven and earth were close, when every sunrise brought the possibility of divine encounter. And in the morning, wake to your own world, your own time, your own beliefs or uncertainties. But carry with you some trace of that ancient wonder, that capacity for meaning-making, that human creativity that looked at stars and rivers and imagined stories vast enough to contain mystery. The Anunnaki endure not as living gods, but as testament to human imagination, to our eternal seeking, to the stories we tell to make sense of existence. And in that enduring, they remain meaningful still, not as objects of worship, but as mirrors reflecting our own need for narrative, for purpose, for connection between human and cosmos, earth and heaven, mortal and immortal, time and eternity.